This is Parenting for the Everyday, a podcast dedicated to meeting parents in the trenches of parenthood. We explore how our faith fits into our parenting. With the help of our guests, we are seeking practical tips on how the gospel can speak into our day-to-day parenting. From the easy stuff to the hard stuff, we want to talk about it all. This is Parenting for the Everyday. I'm Becca Alvarez.
And I'm Holly Dyke-Andrew.
And today we have in our studio Christina to talk about just such an important topic. As we enter a season that is busy and getting busier, it's so easy to get wrapped up in stress and anxiety. And just something that we really wanted to check in was a mental health episode to talk through how can we recognize it in our kids, how can we recognize it in ourselves, and how can we really create a sense of resilience in the family unit. So let's go ahead and kick it off.
And
dive in.
You probably recognize Christina. We've had her on before. We're so thankful that you keep coming back and we haven't scared you away. But Christina, will you just real quick, for those of us who don't know you, will you just do a little intro of who you are, what you do, and why this kind of matters to you a little bit? Mental health in general.
Yeah, for sure. I'm Christina Holwarda. I am a LISW, which is a licensed independent social worker. I am a clinical counselor. So currently in practice, I counsel children here at CCC, children, adolescents, and young adults. I am also a wife and a mother. My husband, Mike Holwarda, is a pastor here. 3 kids. Braden's 8, Kason is 3, and Briella is 1.
Can't believe it.
Yeah.
Great. We're so excited to have you on here. And I was saying before we started rolling, I think we sit and we talk about these really big mental health issues. Like, let's talk about anxiety. Let's talk about depression. And those are all conversations we want to have. But there's also a conversation to have of just like, what is just normal, healthy mental health? What does that look like? How do we keep a pulse on that in our kids? How do we encourage that? Are there things we're doing that could hinder that? So maybe let's just start with like the basic, what role does mental health even play in a child overall well-being?
Yeah. So I think like a basic definition of mental health is a state of mental well-being that the World Health Organization says enables us to cope with the stressors of life, realize our abilities, learn well and work well, and contribute to our society. So it has a large scope. But also, I think mental health is not only about feeling good or about feeling happy or relaxed or at ease all the time. Mental health is about having feelings that make sense in their context and then handling those feelings well.
That's good right there. That's good. That's good already.
So, for example, if your kid's best friend moves away and they feel deeply upset about that, that's actually evidence of their mental health.
It's appropriate.
Yeah. And I think that's an important definition and distinction because oftentimes we equate distress with a mental health concern. And I just don't think that's an accurate equation. Like, we don't want an underreaction and we don't want an overreaction. What we want is feelings to make sense in their context. And honestly, this is biblical too, right? Like, we see a wide range of emotions from Jesus. We see weeping and grief when his friend Lazarus dies. We see anger when the temple is used inappropriately. We see Jesus on the cross crying out in distress, my God, why have you forsaken me? And we know that Jesus's emotional expression is always done in perfection. Like, think about that. Like, he never had an inappropriate emotional response to something.
Yeah.
This is why Christina is often on this podcast, because she's amazing.
So I think like we see how Jesus does that and how we are to mimic that. So the first part is having emotions that match the context. And then the next piece of that is handling those emotions well. So, and I think too, for how long? So do your kids, do they cry? Do they go for a run? Thinking back to the example, are they going to talk about how they're going to miss their friend? Do they go to Jesus with their sadness? Or are they withdrawing and isolating for extended periods of time? Are they irritable and mean day after day? Are they turning it inward on themselves? It's that divide that actually alerts us to whether there's a mental health concern or an appropriate response to a really hard life situation. So we want emotions that match the context, handling those emotions well, and then a gospel, godly framework in which to process hard life things.
Yeah. I'm just so glad we're talking about this because I think of like, I take my kids to the pediatrician for their well checks, like for their body well checks. But am I spending enough time talking about these things or even looking and watching and saying like, okay, wait, where are our emotions in check? Are you responding appropriately? Are we talking about it? And so I'm just excited for.
Yeah, and I love the way that you just described that, because the symptomology that you just described, you can see in all different ages of kids. It doesn't, often when I think of mental health, I think of something that I don't really have to deal with for a long time because my kids are 3 and 1. But the truth is that they are expressing their emotions all the time, if not in excess, in their young age right now. So building healthy ability to express emotion now, you can kind of build on as they get older, which I haven't always thought of that in the same category as mental health, but it really is.
Yeah. So, okay. I'm trying to think, because you said a lot. So I'm trying to think where should we dive in next? So I guess, should we start with maybe even like, what are some mental health myths? I mean, you already said one right off the bat, that this is like, you are sad, or, that is a myth in and of itself, that you're not happy all the time. Are there some other myths that we could just debunk?
Yeah. Yeah, I thought of a few, and any that you guys also think of, I'd love to hear as well. But I think one is kind of going along with that it all looks the same. Right?
Yeah.
Which is just not true. Sometimes it is like the overreaction or the anger, the visible anxiety, but sometimes it's not. And so to be mindful of that. I think another one is that hard emotions just need a boost of positivity. Or that you shouldn't talk about the hard stuff because you just draw attention to it. And that's just not true. I think another one is that emotionally struggling is an indictment on the strength of your faith. Or that you should just trust God more. Yeah. And I think that just, oversimplifies it, obviously, and also is not what we're seeing in Scripture over and over again. So those are 3 kind of bigger ones or more common ones that I kind of thought of.
I don't think that this is necessarily a myth, but I think that's something that parents can struggle with often, is if my toddler's having a hard time, I almost overcompensate with my own emotions to try to shut down his, instead of kind of just giving him space to feel what he's feeling. I have an instinct to go, it's okay, you're okay, it's fine. We're going to kind of put that off and make you feel better so that I can feel better, because your discomfort is making me uncomfortable,
And if you put that in the context of even that mental health definition that we just talked about, you want kids to feel appropriate emotions.
Right.
So if you can enter into even your toddler's world and see like, oh, it's appropriate for you to feel mad that you have to share this toy you love with your brother. Like, I get that. Doesn't mean that you're now responding to it appropriately. There's something else we can address, but hey, it's okay that you feel mad about that.
Yeah.
And that probably, it starts as a toddler, but that's got to go all the way. Into adulthood, we should still be like kind of recognizing that. So what are some ways as parents that we could help foster some of that open communication, or even identifying those emotions? Like what are things that we could be doing, to do it well?
Yeah. Yeah. To like build communication with your kids around emotions.
Yes.
Honestly, there's a lot you can do. I think first it starts with us as parents, right? Like you guys are always saying more is caught than taught.
We got to stop saying that, because everybody keeps bringing it back.
We can make it a tagline.
Hell yeah. Yeah.
But I think if you as a parent aren't comfortable talking about your own emotions personally, it's going to be really hard for you to do that well in parenting. So if that's the case for you, I think like dig into that a little bit, like figure out where that comes from or why that is, and maybe even seek your own help or counsel in that. And then I would give you 3 strategies. First, this might seem obvious, but in order to talk about emotions, you have to have a robust emotion vocabulary. And it's never too early to start that. You can start really young. With young kids, I think it looks like, getting books that talk about emotions or that have a lot of emotional expression. And so you can pause and look at the pictures with your kids and point them out and ask your kids, like, what do you think they might be feeling here? Different shows like Daniel Tiger, Beck.
Love it. We love it.
We always make sure it's like part of our show rotation. But this can also age with your kids, right? Like obviously the content will change, but these are still strategies that you can continue to use as your kids get older. I also like to observe kids' emotions. Like to my kids, like I'll say like, oh boy, it looks like you're sad. Why are you feeling sad? Or like back to that other example, like it is hard to share your toys, and that makes you mad. I get that. And then you can go on to like redirect or handle the situation however you're going to. With kids in my office, I'll say things like, what I think I'm hearing you say is that this situation felt really isolating, or whatever word fits. And sometimes I might be wrong, but just offering that observation invites them to kind of correct me or help them reflect on what they might be feeling in that moment. And then you can pull in resources, like feelings charts or feelings wheel, which we're all a big fan of. But I think it also helps with kids who tend to be internalizers, because it helps them learn how to actually express those emotions. And you can also do it like first in their situation. So if you have a kid who's an internalizer, you can anticipate or notice what you think they might be feeling and say like, hey, it makes me really sad that your friend treated you that way. I can understand if it would make you feel sad too, right? So it's like you're modeling it and you're almost taking that first step in vulnerability for them. So that can be really helpful. The second, I would say it's important to think about the environment or reaction you give when your kids do share their feelings. Vulnerability is hard, and so validation is really, really important. And in almost any context, I would say to start with validation and then move on to whatever's next, because your kids need to feel seen and safe in sharing their emotions. I think sometimes parents can move past that way too quickly and jump right to problem solving.
Yeah.
Or they're resistant to validate because either they feel like the emotion's too big, or honestly, maybe the emotion is a little dramatic, or they don't understand the emotion. So you're like, how can I validate it if I don't get it?
Because even in my case, it would be sometimes someone will share an emotion and I could see like where my kid might have done something to add to it. And so I'm like, if I validate that, am I saying then like you handled the situation correctly?
Yeah.
Right. Does that make sense? So it's like,
yeah.
But I don't know. So I think for me, it's what you're saying is like, are you validating it? That doesn't necessarily mean that you're saying, hey, everything that happened is great. And I'm just saying like what you feel right now, I'm acknowledging it.
Yes.
Correct?
Totally.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I think in situations like that, like you can use language like, I see that you're feeling really,
that's
right?
helpful.
So it's like you're just like noticing the emotion. So it's like you're building this connection with your kids. Like I liken validation to boo-boo kisses when kids are little. Because, like, if my son scrapes his knee and runs to me, like, my kiss doesn't heal his scrape, right? But it's just about feeling seen and cared for. It builds connections with your kids.
Yeah.
And I think when done well, validation can actually diffuse an emotion. Because if I feel like my frustration is seen, I don't have to overstate my frustration in order for it to be responded to. So it doesn't mean that you're validating how they're handling everything, but you're just seeing where your kid is. And you can even experience this as an adult, right? Like when you're talking with a friend or your partner or whatever, you know what it's like when you feel like you're not actually seen for how it's hitting you, even if it's not healthy or justified in how it's hitting you.
Yeah, no, that's helpful.
Man,
sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is so good for so many different reasons, but one of them being a lot of times that I see big emotions, it's when we're in a hurry. It's when we're in a public place. It's when we're already overtired and overstimulated. And so while you're talking, it's just convicting me so much of just take a pause. Take a minute, decompress with them, validate their emotion. Don't always be in such a rush, because when I'm rushing, I make them small. Like, let's tuck it away, put it in your pocket, and let's go. Where that's not helpful for them. It's important to slow down as parents, be secure in our own parenting, don't take things as a reflection of you, and just focus on them.
Well, sometimes it can actually be more productive.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It would help the emotion so much better than trying to extinguish it.
Yeah. And I want to jump to problem solve.
Yeah.
So I want to jump to like, okay, we've had a problem. How can we solve it? How can we, and there's damage in that, and not sitting in like, okay, let me just make sure, in this house you are seen, and I see you in whatever emotion that you've brought in.
Right. So. Yeah. So then I would just give 2 practical tips. One would be to pay attention to when your kids naturally share, and try to intentionally build that into your life. So, for example, I had a mom who said that she noticed her daughter would share a lot when they were driving together. And then once she got her license, she noticed that she wasn't hearing from her daughter as much anymore. So she had to be intentional about, if I tell her we can grab Starbucks on the way to run an errand together,
then she'd
come with me, and then we're talking more. So just kind of being mindful of those things and being intentional about building that in. The other thing I would say is to have it be a part of your family worship time. Like notice like when Jesus has emotions or God has them and in response to what, or all the ways the Bible shows us that like the Lord invites us to him in our emotions, or even the Psalms, like just the fact that like the Lord gave us an entire book of the Bible all about like deep emotional expression, but showing us how to do it in a way that like honors and glorifies the Lord. So you're using the Bible to normalize emotions and talking about them.
Yeah.
I have a question that is going to be off topic a little bit. Not off topic, but off of our pre-questions. How do you bring your spouse into it? Because I think that as women, I'm more comfortable talking about emotions than my male spouse. And I would assume that there are a lot of dads out there that maybe don't feel as comfortable talking about emotion. How would you guys bring your spouses into it?
Well, I think one, you could maybe have a conversation with your spouse, like between the two of you, like initially kind of address it, like between the two of you and talk about like why that's important. Or even like we kind of talked about initially, like if that is uncomfortable, like kind of figure out why that is and how to work through that a little bit. I think another practical tip that can make it easier is like if you have it be a part of like dinner time or whenever you have your family time together, if you were to do like a high and a low, or if you have a feelings chart that you have like on your dinner table, or you go around and you say like, okay, what's one happy or positive emotion you felt today? What's one hard emotion you felt today? And how did you deal with it? So I think like, it can be powerful for kids to hear their dad say like, yeah, I had this presentation today and I felt really anxious about it. And so, I took a couple of minutes, I prayed, I tried to take some deep breaths, and then I reminded myself like the Lord has like gifted me in this, and I walked into it, right? And so it's like you can even ease into how do you talk about emotions in a way that feels like more empowering for you, that then hopefully you just keep learning to do it together.
We've talked a lot about just communication, and obviously that being really, really important between your spouse, with your kids, with their siblings. But what are some other practical, I don't know if coping mechanisms is the right word, but maybe tools in our toolbox to help have just healthy mental health states in our house, or to encourage healthy mental living? I think I just made that phrase up, but I think you know what I mean.
I do. When someone comes in my office, we talk about like 3 different areas. We talk about healthy habits, healthy coping, and healthy processing.
Okay.
So I think healthy habits are ways you support your mental health or set yourself up well in order to have your healthiest stress response. So 3 big ones are sleep, exercise, and nutrition. Sleep is an active time for your brain. It's when it cleans out toxins from the day. And research has shown that your amygdala, the emergency response center in your brain that activates your fight, flight, or freeze, is most impacted by inadequate sleep than any other part of your brain.
Oh, boy.
Which is crazy.
Unfortunate news.
Yeah. Exercise or physical activity, it offsets symptoms of an activated amygdala. It burns off excess adrenaline. It's known to promote growth in brain cells and the release of dopamine, the happy hormone. And it doesn't always have to be intense. Like going for a walk is really good for your mental health. There's actually research that shows if you walk outside, your eyes naturally shift from right to left as you're taking in what you're seeing, which is essentially creating neural pathways from your right brain to your left brain, connecting logic to emotion. So actually the trauma therapy EMDR was developed out of that research.
That's so cool that God would create
cool,
your
It's
brain
so
to
cool.
do that.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yes. Nutrition, eating nutritious foods, but also eating consistently, like not skipping meals, because a drop in blood sugar can mimic feelings of anxiety. Another interesting fact is that 95% of serotonin receptors are found in the lining of your gut. So what you eat can actually impact your mood.
So much. My mind is taking so much in.
I know.
But I mean, all these are so good for like, I'm thinking in
grown-ups.
parenting, but this is also like for grownups. Like, am I doing these things? Are my kids watching me do these things so that they then recognize like, oh, she makes it a priority. Like we go for a walk,
Right.
we go, are we doing these things?
Right.
Am I encouraging my kids to like, hey, no, put that down, have an apple instead, type thing.
And that's just like, those are just healthy habits, right? Like that's not even specifically about coping. So then coping is how you handle or deal with your emotions, or channeling that emotion into something constructive instead of destructive. So we can talk about clinical ones like breathing techniques or grounding skills or mindfulness, but then it's also just things like journaling or listening to music or taking quiet, calm space for a little bit, or doing something creative like drawing or coloring or painting. And then physical activity can also be a coping skill, right? Like going for a walk, going for a run. Especially for boys, there's definitely a physicality to emotions. So doing something physical can help release that emotion, whether it's like kicking a soccer ball against the basement wall or punching bag, sprints, jumping jacks, like anything physical.
Again, just as a parent, am I creating space for those things to happen? I even think like if our day is so full, I haven't created space for my kids to have these outlets, that could be a disservice. So, I'm taking it all in.
Yeah. And I think like it's important for parents to model these things, healthy habits, but also healthy coping. Like you don't have to hide the fact that you have an emotional reaction. I think it's probably even better for your kids to see that and then see what you do to handle that well, or how to cope with that emotion. Or if you mess it up, then you go back and you apologize, you acknowledge that you messed it up, and then you try again. Or, like I'll talk to parents sometimes of adolescents and say, like, if you're in a conversation with your teen and you're starting to get really frustrated, like you can say that, like, you know what, I'm feeling really frustrated in this moment. I just need to take a couple deep breaths. Let's pause the conversation. Like, why don't we do it together? And then you continue on, right? So modeling it is good. Don't feel like you can't have the emotion as the parent.
Yeah, that's good.
Did you have a third? Do you have a third? Okay.
Oh, well, healthy processing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which I think we've kind of talked about, and I think we're going to go into talking about a little bit more.
Question. We're talking about mental health and the importance of it and the importance to create space for it. Is there ever a time that it can be overemphasized and like almost give people an excuse?
I think it's a good, culture right now.
Yeah.
Like mental health.
Like I can't because of my anxiety.
My mental health.
You hear that a lot.
It's not good for my mental health.
Mm-hmm. So where do we find the balance between overemphasizing and maybe crippling? I use that lightly. And then the other side of giving space and building resilience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're going to head into resilience a little bit, which we can kind of walk into that in a minute as well. But I also think like there is a cultural trendiness of it that I think is important to be aware of. The Fuller Youth Institute came out with a book recently, or maybe actually a couple of years ago, based on research study. It's called The 3 Big Questions That Change Every Teenager. And it talks about how every teenager is looking for belonging, identity, and purpose. And so I think at times it's possible for like a elevated mental health struggle to come out of like a desire for belonging or a group of friends who find their identity in that, which doesn't make it any less delicate, but it just informs kind of how you respond. I also think like this is kind of what you asked, maybe in a different light. We talked about building an intentional time to talk with your kids. I think sometimes bedtime can be a good time because things are quieting down. Sometimes it can be the worst time because if your kids are extra tired and now you're giving attention to something in an emotional space, you're creating a bigger problem out of something when you're actually not in the right headspace to process through it. So I do think you're mindful of how you bring attention to it or how you respond to it. I think if, kind of going into that resilience conversation, like there is ways to build resilience or to help your kids work on just because something's hard doesn't mean I don't do it. Mm-hmm. So I think, we do need to let our kids struggle in small ways and then sometimes like in real big ways. And it doesn't mean that we do it from afar. We just push them into it, right? Like we draw near, like the Lord draws near to us as well. We prepare them for it. We talk through it. We help them anticipate what is maybe to come, and so that they feel empowered and ready to walk into that situation. But I think our kids need to know that they are capable and that we believe that they are capable, right? I actually had one of my son's teachers call me out on this one time because he was struggling with something, and I just swooped in to do it for him. And he was like, he can do it. And I was like, oh, okay. But I was actually really appreciative because it's true. Like, I need my son to have the experience of like, this is hard and I might struggle through it, but I can still do it. And I can't just give up, and I can work my way through it. And I think that's true in big and in small ways. And I think, honestly, like, it builds a resilience in our faith as well. Like, Romans 5 tells us suffering produces perseverance, character, and character, hope. And we as adults, like, know that to be true. Like, we can point to experiences in our life where we see, like, while struggle was hard, like, this is how I came to know the Lord as healer or comforter, or my dependence on him. So, you know, there's ways you do it where you're leading your children to Jesus in it, or you're empowering them in it. But it doesn't mean that you scoop them from the struggle. Yeah. From doing the hard thing.
Which is hard.
It's really hard.
It's so hard.
So hard.
Yeah.
It's even hard in my very small context of it, of seeing Ezekiel, my 3-year-old, get frustrated with small tasks, you know, and I'll let him do it for a little bit and then want to fix it or help him or put a shoe on for him, you know, like little things. I can't imagine as it gets bigger and there are things that you can probably fix for your kids, but it's just better to let them do it on their own.
Yeah, I'll just tell you it's hard. Okay. I'll speak from that experience.
I think another way you build resilience in your kids is with like empowerment and building like a healthy confidence and identity, right? Because it's hard for you to think, oh, I can't do this hard thing if you don't think good things about yourself. Yeah. So, like, I encourage parents to not let a day go by where you're not speaking some kind of goodness or positive reinforcement over your kids. And I like to frame it in, like, I love that God made you, and then picking out unique qualities about them. Like, you're creative, you're thoughtful, you're curious. So that way you're anchoring it in the ways that the Lord intentionally designed them. Or, you know, I notice things that your kids are doing. Like, I'll say to my son, like, can I tell you something I noticed today? I noticed that you are courageous because even though you felt nervous, you still did this. And it reminds me of that verse in Joshua where God tells us, be strong and courageous, for I'm with you wherever you go. So you're anchoring it all in, this is your worth that the Lord has given you, and you're enabling it with the power of the word.
Yeah. I love that.
While we're on that topic, if you're starting to notice that your child is kind of name-calling themselves and having pretty negative self-talk, what's a good intervention with that? Because I feel like my instinct would be like, don't say that about yourself, but that doesn't really fix it. That just...
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think... personally, how I would respond to that is I would say, like, oh, it makes me really sad to hear you say that about yourself. Yeah. Like, I don't think those things of you. I know the Lord doesn't think those things of you either. Like, where'd that come from? Yeah. Like, where do you think that came from? And what do you think the Lord would speak to you over that? What are some truth statements that we can say in response to that, or things like that?
Yeah. I feel like we could keep going on and on and on, but we are running out of time. So I just want to kind of end it with one last question of, you know, all of these things we've talked about are kind of like normal walks through mental health that we would expect our kids to have seasons where they struggle and don't struggle, and we can walk them through. But let's just maybe create a line that says, hey, at what point would we maybe need to seek some help, or recognize like, hey, this is outside a normal mental health check-in. This is outside a normal problem. We probably need a professional to come in and give us some guidance here. Maybe just speak to that, and then we'll just wrap it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, you know, if we're talking about anything clinical, the things that we tend to look at is how much it's impairing functioning. So like how much it's it's interfering with their ability to do day-to-day things. The duration of it. So if it's like an intense emotion for an extended period of time, that's always something that would raise alarms. I think any drastic change is something to be mindful of. Okay. Sleep changes, big change in academic performance, things like that. I also think like it doesn't have to be drastic to seek help, right? Like it's never bad to invite other voices into your kids' lives, especially there's going to come a time where your teenager's just not going to hear your voice for a little while. And that happens for everybody. And having a different adult say the exact same thing that you're saying, they're going to hear it differently. So there are times where it's like, yes, you need to seek help. And then there's other times where it might be like, hey, why don't why don't we just seek help? It's not like a emergent situation, but it's not going to be a negative thing. Or even asking your child, like, would you be interested in this?
I love that you said that, because even that habit of into an adulthood of like, hey, let's normalize this. Let's normalize other voices and you having a space that you can process, because, life changes, and knowing like, oh, this is a normal thing. I'm an adult now. This is something that I could do to get some help. So I love that you said that. This has been like a wealth of knowledge.
It really has.
I personally am so grateful. Just this is good for me to have this check-in and this just reminders of things to be doing at home. And so I'm really grateful for you.
Yeah. Thank you, Christina. Thank you for bringing just your wisdom and your knowledge, and you're just amazing. That's all the time that we have, unfortunately, but thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please tune in next time. This has been Parenting for the Everyday.